Welcome back to The Explainer. Okay, let's dive right into this. Today we're unpacking a fascinating and honestly deeply unsettling piece of regional folklore. We are looking at the rural village of Rajanpur. It's this place where the lines between historical tragedy and literal supernatural terror completely blur. We're going to analyze two primary legends drawn straight from local accounts passed down for decades to dissect exactly how these chilling myths operate and what they tell us about the region's incredibly dark past. Just listen to this. Son, never take the old peepal tree road at night, no matter how much of a hurry you are in. That is a direct warning from a local village elder named Ram Swarup Baba. And wow, it perfectly sets the stage for our analysis today. It's not just a casual suggestion, it's a strict boundary set by the locals. It tells us right off the bat that in Rajanpur, the landscape itself becomes incredibly dangerous the second the sun goes down. So let's get right into the untold horrors of Rajanpur. To really understand these horrors, we have to look at Ajay. He's a skeptical city guy who just completely ignored those warnings. We can map out his escalating dread as he foolishly takes a shortcut on the muddy, rainy, old people road. Picture this. At 9 p.m., he starts walking. He's surrounded by absolutely nothing but the sounds of crickets and frogs in this dense jungle. Fast forward to 9:15, and that creeping isolation is broken by the sound of mysterious footsteps trailing right behind him. Then, by 9:30 p.m., things take a terrifying turn. He encounters a weeping woman in a white sari. And just 10 minutes later, at 9:40 p.m., the absolute peak of isolation hits. His flashlight dies completely, his phone loses all signal, and he feels this freezing, ice-cold touch right on his shoulder. And that brings us to the old peepal tree, and Radha. That freezing touch on Ajay's shoulder? Yeah, that brings us to the entity herself. She's tied to this really grim backstory and a very specific landmark. This is Radha, and her story brilliantly illustrates the relentless nature of supernatural vengeance in local folklore. According to the source material, Radha was the daughter of a village Thakur, and she was brutally murdered on that exact same path. When Ajay encounters her, he sees this woman in a white sari, her face just soaked in blood, and most chillingly, she has completely empty eye sockets. She's forever bound to the old pitpatri, unable to move on, constantly searching that muddy path for her killer. She asks anyone who crosses her path to take her to the one who betrayed her. Which leads us to the terrifying fate of betrayal. So as Ajay is literally sinking into the mud, actually feeling a force drag him down toward the tree roots, he gets intercepted by an old tantric. This tantric reveals that Ajay have stepped right into a trap of supernatural retribution. And suddenly, all the narrative pieces fall into place. First, Mohan arrives. Mohan is the very same local boy who convinced Ajay to take the shortcut in the first place. The tantric then reveals the dark truth. Mohan was actually Radha's childhood lover, and he murdered her out of pure greed, just leaving her there to die alone. The grisly, supernatural consequence of Mohan's betrayal follows immediately. The roots of the peepal tree literally come alive. They wrap right around Mohan's legs and drag him down into the darkness as his screams echo through the jungle. Radha's vengeance is finally complete. But as with all great folklore, the story doesn't end there. 6 months later, 3 more villagers vanish on that exact same road. Everyone assumed Radha would rest after getting her revenge on Mohan, but actually, her spirit had only grown stronger. So Ajay is called back, but this time, he's armed with a protective red thread. When he returns to the peepal tree, he doesn't just find Radha. He finds her leading an entire army of betrayed spirits, people who died from deceit. It turns into this massive, epic confrontation. The tantric, Girdhari, has to use a holy protective circle, a trident, and ancient mantras to battle the spirits. It eventually results in this blinding flash of light that leaves a permanent, smoking black burn mark right on the trunk of the peepal tree. Let's move to and see how this builds our understanding of Rajanpur's lore. When we compare these entities, things get really interesting. On one hand, we have Radha, which is a deeply intimate haunting, right? Her horror is born from personal betrayal and individual greed. But on the other hand, we have a completely different category of paranormal phenomenon, the 1946 villagers. This is a mass haunting driven by historical, systemic tyranny. It takes the scale of the horror from a single dark path and expands it to an entire doomed village. So let's explore this cursed village of 1946. To dive into this second legend, we follow a stranded traveler named Arush. He makes a grave mistake on a freezing December night, and his situation just goes from bad to much, much worse. First, his bus abandons him at an isolated dhaba. Then, shockingly, the dhaba owner completely locks up his shop at exactly 5 a.m. The guy is absolutely terrified. He explicitly warns Arush that the village down the road has been totally empty for 75 years, and that crossing its boundary after sunset means certain death. But Arush, acting on logic rather than local superstition, assumes it's all just rumors and walks straight into the pitch-black, powerless village to find shelter anyway. The atmospheric dread here is palpable. I mean, imagine walking into a village that has been dead for over 7 decades. And then, Arush experiences a terrifying jump scare. He spots a figure in the darkness. Thinking it's just a local woman, he approaches. But that illusion shatters instantly. He's faced with a horrifying vision, a ghostly woman laughing hysterically while hanging completely upside down from the branches of a tree. Absolute panic sets in, and Arush scrambles back into the woods, where he bumps into a mysterious young man hiding behind a tree. This man introduces himself as Kishan Kumar. This brings us to the tragic story of Rupa and Kishan. Kishan actually provides Arush with shelter inside a dilapidated, ruined house and reveals the real historical truth behind the haunting. Here's the timeline of that 1946 tragedy. During the British colonial era, an English official laid eyes on a beautiful village girl named Rupa and demanded her. The local village chief, who was eager to please the colonial powers, ordered Rupa's father to hand her over, but the father refused to bow to this tyranny. Instead, he secretly arranged for Rupa to be married to a boy from a neighboring area, Kishan. So a midnight wedding ceremony began in defiance. But the village chief found out. He arrived with his soldiers, locked all the villagers inside the wedding venue, doused it in petrol, and burned the entire village alive in a single night. Now, the sources state that the villagers did ultimately take vengeance on that corrupt chief and his soldiers, killing them, but the sheer trauma and the suddenness of their fiery deaths meant their souls could never cross over. They remained trapped, cursing that very land for over 75 years. The strict rule of this cursed folklore is terrifyingly simple. The victims became vengeful spirits, and anyone who crosses their boundary after dark is doomed to join them in their eternal suffering. So the real question is, are they still there? Well, Arush actually survives the night. Thanks to the shelter provided by Kishan Kumar, he manages to stay hidden from the malicious entities roaming around outside. He wakes up the next morning to the sound of a bus horn, safe and sound in the daylight. But before we wrap up this explainer, we have to ask you a critical question. Who exactly saved Arush? Think about it. Who was this young man hiding in the woods, terrified of the other spirits, who kindly offered a stranded traveler a safe place to sleep? Arush looks around the sunlit room and notices some old, dusty papers scattered near some books. He picks up one of these decaying pieces of paper and reads it. It's a wedding invitation. Rupa weds Kishan, 22nd December 1946. So the crucial point here is, the young man who saved him, the very man Arush spent the entire night talking to, was none other than the 75-year-old ghost of the groom himself. Kishan was trapped with the rest of the village, but while the others were completely consumed by wrath and vengeance, Kishan retained his humanity. He chose to protect innocent travelers who wandered into his cursed home. It completely recontextualizes the entire story, doesn't it? Which leaves us with one final lingering thought based on the folklore of Rajanpur. You've seen the vengeful rage of Radha on the Old People Road, and you've seen the massive tragedy of the 1946 cursed village. So tell me, if you found yourself stranded in the fog near Rajanpur at night, would you trust the person offering you shelter, or would you be stepping right into the hands of a ghost? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember, keep questioning the shadows.